morning, guys. Great to see you here this morning, and it's great to wake up, isn't it, and not wear a jacket. I think it's the first morning I've done that in a long time. Well, we've got some important territory to cover. We've had some really deep dives the last couple of weeks. We talked about the father issues, the father wound, and some of those things 2 weeks ago. Last Friday morning, didn't Kim do an amazing job just disclosing her own losses and teaching us some things about acknowledging that and some steps toward healing that. And that had an equally deep effect on Wednesday evening with the guys who were there. And today we want to talk about another subject that it can be a source of great rejoicing. It can be a source where you feel like, I feel so rich in this area. It may be something that is very piercing for you. Because we've been talking about the heart, and if the heart doesn't change, then nothing changes. We've been talking about ways to feed the heart, to grow the heart, to acknowledge what's happening in the heart, because Jesus said that everything issues from the heart. What we say, what we do, how we act, our motives, it all comes out of this vessel, this place we call the heart. And today we want to talk about the friended heart. We're not talking about Facebook here. We're talking about having a friend. Do I have a friend? A friend of mine sent me a video a couple of weeks ago, and it was a very disturbing video for me to watch. The video was of Pete Briscoe. Pete is the son, if you know, of Stuart Briscoe. He's been a major voice in evangelicalism for all of my life. And Pete Briscoe, who was the subject of the video, is probably in his 50s, his early 50s. And he's pastored a church in Frisco, Texas for 28 years called Bent Tree Church. It's a very successful, multi-campus church. And he came on to address his congregation after being gone for many months. Nobody knew really where he was or what he was doing. The elders knew a little bit about what he was doing, but he had needed a sabbatical. He needed a break, and he came back to report to the church. He basically said, "I'm here to tell you that I'm resigning today." He said, "Over the years, I've had cycles of exhaustion and depression." He said, when I would come to June and I would be up ready to take a break and take some vacation and plan next year, he said, each year, the preaching year, the teaching year, the leadership year got more and more exhausting, and I would get to March and I could just barely make it to June, and pretty soon I was feeling like I was depressed all winter, and I just couldn't get to that place. And he said I was just running on empty over and over again. Finally, the elders noticed that. He finally said something to them. They said, "You need to get some time away." They gave him some time away to kind of collect himself. He said he came back and he made another run at it, and he said, "I was really falling apart." He said, "I was not present." He said, I was dabbling in some things. And he said, if I had taken one more step, I would have gone over the brink. And I would have ruined my reputation. I would have devastated this church. I would have sundered my marriage and devastated my children. He said, God intervened and kept me from taking that step, but he said, I came to that place, and he said, I realized I am totally isolated. He said, I'm a respected pastor, I'm a leader, everybody thinks I'm a great guy, but nobody knows me. His wife told about an experience where in one of these times of exhaustion, he kind of pulled himself together up by his own bootstraps, and he had to go to his church for a conference with over 3,000 people at this leadership conference where he was one of the keynote speakers. And he spoke that day, and he came home, and he was kind of high and enjoying that, and he told his wife, "I had a great day today." And she said, "Well, I'm glad you had a great time with your 3,200 adoring fans." She said, "I've been home crying all day." And that started to wake him up. He said, "I don't have one friend in my life." Does that remind you of somebody in the Bible? David had Jonathan. Remember their relationship? I'll just trust that you have an echo of that in your memory. David and Jonathan loved each other. They had a love for each other that David said was stronger than my love for a woman. They fought beside each other. They kept a covenant together. They were brothers in battle together. And then Jonathan, as you recall, was killed in battle. And of course, the Bible narrates this, but it doesn't say this. There's a silence about this, but one could make the case that David's life changed when his friend was no longer there. Because what happened to David a couple of seasons later? Well, David stayed home. He should have been out to battle with his troops, but he stayed home. He didn't have a friend saying, David, your troops need you. And one day David was wandering around on the roof of his house and he saw Bathsheba bathing. And he sent one of his servants. He said, I'd like to get to know my neighbors. Let's invite her over for a little coffee. And that led to his adultery, his hiding of that, his arranging for Uriah, her husband, to be put at the front of the battle and killed. And finally, David was confronted by Nathan, the prophet, with his sin. I think we could make the case, even though it's a silence in the Bible, I think we could make the case that David's life changed dramatically, spiritually, politically, and emotionally when he lost his friend. Let's see if you can complete the song. When you're down and troubled and you need a helping hand. Winter, spring, summer, or fall. All you've got to do is call. You've got a friend. That song's been popular for 50 years, and we still love it. James Taylor is an ancient guy now, but we still love to hear him sing that song. Here's what it says in Ecclesiastes 4. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend will help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. We're not talking this morning about playing nice, sharing your toys, or being friendly, or just, working in a group or something adding to your do list. We're not talking about having a friend. We're talking about being a friend. And perhaps making a friend. What's our theme here? Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. But as soon as we start talking about men, and men caring about each other, men having a closer relationship with maybe one or two guys over everybody else, and needing each other, and loving each other. Sometimes as soon as we start talking about dads loving their sons and saying that to them, men immediately clam up, and that's partly because of the corruption of our language and the corrosive culture in which we live. Somebody has called it a pansexualized culture. Everything is sexualized. Certainly marriage is, dating is, friendships are sexualized. Schools and politics are sexualized. Everything has this sexualization, and childhood is being sexualized. And so as soon as we start talking about men, we can say loving each other in Christ, or we can say liking each other, or being best friends, or needing one another. We immediately begin to be suspicious that roommates, partners, friends have somehow have this overtone of a sexual relationship. So it's no longer the Magnificent Seven. Now we're thinking about Brokeback Mountain. You can't even be a cowboy and not be suspicious. So the only place that men feel really free and safe to be men is either drinking beer or in sports. And the only place we touch is after touchdowns, a high five. Now, that's not totally true, but so much of the time it is. But I need a friend. Don't you need a friend? We need somebody who knows us. Our heart longs for a friend. So let's just acknowledge that. It is not wrong to long for a man who's your friend, who knows you, who will come running when you're in trouble, winter, spring, summer, or fall. Just think of me and I'll be there. So let's walk through some content here. So in all the world, who's the best example of a friend? There, we got the right Sunday school answer, right? But it's true. Jesus is the best friend you could ever have. So let's just talk about some of the qualities, just briefly, that Jesus had. Number one, let's take him out of the clouds. And Pastor Wes has been doing a great job of that here in his preaching, of making Jesus, helping us see that Jesus was fully human. So let's examine his friend behavior. Number one, he was selfless. He said, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lays down his life for his friends." And everything Jesus taught and lived, he was demonstrating that, and ultimately, obviously, at the cross. So we have to overcome some cultural caricatures of what a man is. There's the perpetual adolescent, the pajama boy, a young man who's caught up in his texting and his parties and his beer fixation. There's the High Plains drifter with Clint Eastwood and Jason Bourne. Totally self-sufficient, comes from nowhere, goes to nowhere, and nobody knows him. There's the mothered man, Ray Romano. He was pecked to death by chickens every day. But there is a love between men that can be manly and strong and necessary for us. Jesus said selflessness. He modeled that selflessness is part of friendship culture. Secondly, he was proactive. He said to his friends, he said to Peter, "Strengthen your brothers." You go out and you strengthen someone. He said to Peter, "Feed my sheep." Jesus taught other men how to move into their life, how to not be passive. And Jesus took Peter, he sought him out, he called him, he assigned him. He said, "Go and do this for me. You're my friend, you can do this. I can see this in you. Be proactive, Peter." And that was modeled by Barnabas, who went and found Saul, who became the Apostle Paul, when he was a dangerous man, and he brought him into his circle. And then that was modeled by Paul himself, who found Timothy. And Timothy was told, the things that you've been taught, I want you to take and teach to someone else so that they can teach to someone else. So friendship is this proactive, not just waiting around, "Oh, will somebody come and be my friend?" It's entering into the lives of other people. And you find you find friends when you expend yourself and you extend yourself to other people. Thirdly, his friendships were reciprocal. It's a two-way street. You're not really friends if you're always the giver, if you're always the one with the answer, if you're always the strong one, when you're always the one who never has a need. Jesus said, "I call you friends," because he also needed them. He didn't need them in an existential way. He needed them to help him. He asked them to pray for him. He asked them to go places, to arrange for things, to accompany him. And he sent them and he depended on them. And they were a band, literally a band of brothers. So, will you be my friend? Remember when you were a 5-year-old boy? First day on recess in first grade or kindergarten, you ran out saw some kid that you seemed to like for some reason, and you ran right up to him and said, "Will you be my best friend?" I mean, there's no filter, right? And you watch little boys. They glom together. It's a joy to watch them, how they so easily become friends. And partly that's because everything they have is in common. You know, they go to the same school, they play on the same team, they have the same rules of their life, they go to bed at the same time, they do all this stuff. Everything they're learning is the same. So it's really simple to find friends when everything is the same. But do men outgrow friendship? Well, no, we never outgrow it, but sometimes we outdistance it. And there's some reasons that men struggle with friendship. It isn't just because we're cold and aloof, although we'll get to that. But we have disconnections. I grew up in Golden, Colorado, from first grade to March of my junior year in high school, so 11 years. And the last quarter of my junior year in high school, we moved to Rialto, California. My dad was a pastor, and we moved there. And I moved from a school of 600 where I knew everybody. We all grown up together. We knew who the good math people were. We knew that Priscilla would get an A+ on her English paper, and we knew who would help us in our chemistry lab. You know, we knew all that stuff. I knew who the good sports were. I moved to California, went to a school of about 2,000 students, and it was like Stalag 13, man. It was just a rough place. So I went through my senior year friendless. I ran on some teams and knew some guys, but I didn't really know anybody. So when I graduated from high school, I don't know one single person from my high school graduating party. And then I went and worked at a camp, and I met a young guy named Mickey, and he became a good friend of mine for 2 summers as we worked together. He taught me a lot about the Lord, and he became a mentor of sorts, and really became a good friend. Then I went to college, and in college I had roommates and teammates and different girls that I dated. I met Morris, who counseled me when my heart was broken by this heartless woman who broke up with me. Praise the Lord. Looking back on it, don't you remember those? Wow. Oh. Whew, thank you, Lord. But anyway, it didn't feel like that at the time. But I had a friend who listened to me and walked me through that. Then I got married to my best friend. And we moved from California to Denver and went to seminary. And there we joined a church. We were there for 10 years in this church and formed some deep, deep friendships. And we moved across town about 10 miles to another church. But we retained those friendships, and they were deep friendships that went beyond our ministry role, which is kind of an occupational hazard for pastors. Just try introducing your pastor to your golf foursome and listen to how silent it becomes, you know. But we had some great friends there. And then we moved to Minnesota in 1991. And it was before Facebook and cell phones, and we lost track with a lot of those people, or the contact was intermittent. They certainly weren't available to us. And I remember going through a season here. I was always Roger in Colorado. Here I became Pastor Thompson. I'm not sure what that is about the Midwestern culture, or if I look that much older. But it was a deference to my role, and I appreciate that. It was an honorific kind of way, hey, Pastor Thompson. But I didn't like that because that made me put me in my role and not in any kind of relationship with people. So it took me 5 or 6 years. It took us 10 years to find a small group. Not because people didn't want us in the group, but because we ruined all the groups that we joined. Because they treated us like the pastor and his wife. And you can't be in a small group in your role. You need to be in a relationship. So we found some people who didn't care that I was their pastor. Didn't treat me like a pastor, and we started a small group. But that was hard for me. Plus my schedule's weird, and I'm just detailing some things that may relate to you. I had a weird lifestyle. I was always ramping up on Friday when everybody else was ramping down. And even when I would leave the church and the secretary would say, hey, have a nice weekend, I'd go, do you know what I do? I'm going to be busy from now. This is prime time. The next 48 hours is like marathon time for me. So I'm working when everybody else is ramping down, and then Mondays were my day off. Well, how many of you are available on Mondays? Retired people. I'll see you at McDonald's next Monday. Well, all I'm saying is you have situations, men get disconnected partly because they're mobile, they change careers, they move localities, you change churches, you lose track of people, and you start over. And many times because we change a career, for example, right in the height of our ladder climbing, we just dive right into our jobs. Right into that career. Our wife is worrying about the kids and the soccer and all that, and we are traveling, going, and we're climbing that ladder. And so we don't have time for friendships. So we don't outgrow the need for friendships, but we outdistance some of our opportunities for that. And part of that is the man code that I talk about. You know, that we're unflappable, self-contained, competent. We're ready, meaning we're inexhaustible. We're strong. We're untouched. So here's 6 don'ts of typical manhood. Don't let your guard down. Don't show too much emotion. Don't get too involved. Don't let on how much you really care or hurt. Don't touch each other, except in sports. And don't act needy. But Jesus said, and modeled, he was selfless, he was proactive, he was reciprocal, and there was a lot going on in those relationships. Well, we could be friends. And let me just show you some things. You've probably seen these before, but they're in your notes. We can fill in these blanks that are there. We're going to talk about levels of sharing, and you might want to draw this really tough diagram. Because at the top here is the number of people that you can expose yourself to in this particular level of relationship. So the top level is cliche. It's elevator talk. It's non-sharing. How about those Vikings, you know? It's sunny today, you know? You don't risk anything. Nobody's ever been hurt in an elevator speech. I don't think. You know, it's just sharing nothing. It's what you share in the commons, really. And we spiritualize it by, hey, how's it going? Well, I've said that 15 times this morning. Oh, I'm doing great. You know, and that's true, but I don't reveal anything about myself. And this can be shared with anybody, any total stranger across the globe, and you're not vulnerable at all. But the next one is called facts. You're sharing what you know. You're revealing more about yourself. You might even delve into some opinions that you have. It's a little more risky. And there's fewer people that are going to understand you at the level of facts. It's a smaller population. But then we want to just kind of draw a waterline here. Because when we go below the waterline, the population with whom we can share this starts to shrink and narrow. And what we're going to share becomes more vulnerable. And that's called emotion. How you feel. Now, we're not talking here about slobbering and snot, you know. We're not talking about just buckets of gushing emotion. We're just saying, are you feeling something? Is there something that has touched you? Friendships will not form unless we go below this waterline. If we're just snorkeling around on the surface, then we have a lot of shooting buddies and car buddies and sports buddies and beer buddies and all that, but we don't have somebody who starts to know us. So we start sharing how we feel with some emotion. And I've already said this over and over. I'll say it again because, you know, sarcasm is a form of humor. It can be a lot of fun in very small, selective doses. But when somebody's sharing an emotion, sarcasm is a killer. It just stops that disclosure. Because you see, sarcasm always has a barb of truth to it. So be very careful about that. We talk about that, or we try to warn you about that around the tables. Another killer is just busyness and work. That kills the opportunity to share how we feel. We just plow on. Or betraying a confidence kills this as well. So we need trust. You know, this whole issue is the deeper the trust, the more transparency we have. And obviously we're headed down here where it's going to be very few people, maybe just one, that you can totally trust. Well, what's the next level down? Well, it's vulnerability. If emotion is sharing how you feel, vulnerability is sharing what you need. You know, here's what I think I need. I'm going to present it to you. I'm just going to blah. I'm going to vomit it out, and I'm going to let you help me figure out if that's the right thing I need. And in Ironworks, we try to allow a context where occasionally, maybe not every time you're together, but occasionally you put your toe across that line. And you disclose around your table or to somebody in conversation, you know, you may not even use these words, but here's what I need. And this is what I'm hearing over and over from guys in this group, that they're starting to gain some friendships, or they're extending their friendships. And it all happens because of the exact opposite of what we would think. We would think, if I could share my strengths with you, you would just want to be my friend. Because I've got all the power tools, and I know how to do this, and I've done that. And you would just so admire me, you just want to hang around me. I'd be magnetic for you. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be competent, not at all. But it's the exact opposite. You know how friendships are formed? It's when I become vulnerable to you. When I share something about myself that's risky. There's a book I've been reading. It's by a woman, wouldn't you know it? It's by a woman named Brené Brown, and it's called Daring Greatly. And it's basically a book about overcoming our shame so that we become vulnerable. I want to read you just a paragraph here. She became really famous in a TED Talk about vulnerability. But what she says, I think, is so applicable to men. Here's what she says. She went out on her TED Talk, and she said, "First, I asked the audience, how many of you struggle to be vulnerable because you think of vulnerability as weakness?" Hands shot up across the room. Then I asked, when you watched people on this stage being vulnerable, how many of you thought it was courageous? And again, hands shot up across the room. We love seeing raw truth and openness in other people, but we're afraid to let them see it in us. We're afraid that our truth isn't enough, that what we have to offer isn't enough without bells and whistles, without editing and impressing. I was afraid to walk on that stage and show the audience my kitchen table self. These people were too important, too successful, too famous. My kitchen table self is too messy, too imperfect, too unpredictable. Here's the crux of the struggle. I want to experience your vulnerability, but I don't want to be vulnerable myself. And here's the capstone statement. Vulnerability is courage in you and inadequacy in me. You know, I see vulnerability as courage, but when I see it in myself, it seems inadequate. I'm drawn to your vulnerability, but repelled by mine. And that's the bridge we need to cross. And we can't just do that by diving in headlong into the deep end. We have to recognize that there's trust being built in a relationship, and I can risk this with you. And when I risk that with you, you are drawn to me, and vice versa. There are some myths I want to just share briefly. He said there's some myths about vulnerability. One is, quote, I don't do vulnerability. Unfortunately, there's no get out of vulnerability free card. We can't opt out of the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure that's woven through our daily experiences. Life is vulnerable. The second myth is vulnerability is letting it all hang out. Vulnerability is based on mutuality and requires boundaries and trust. It's not oversharing. It's not purging. It's not indiscriminate disclosure, and it's not celebrity-style social media information dumps. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. Being vulnerable and open is mutual and an integral part of our trust-building process. Here's what I say to people who are struggling, and maybe some of the things we've talked about in the last 2 weeks, the father wound and loss. I say, there's one or two people in your life who should know you intimately, and they know your downside, they know your dark side. You can go vomit on their kitchen table, and they will accept you, and you won't harm their spiritual life. One or two people need that. Maybe it's a counselor who knows that. And then with everybody else, be truthful but vague. Don't go vomiting your vulnerability in a Sunday school class. Don't expect that you can come here on Sunday morning and in the Commons just blah on somebody. People pick on the church all the time saying, I can't be real at Berean. Well, of course not. There's 1,000 people here. We're not designed as a small group on Sunday morning. But you can be truthful but vague. Hey, pray for us. We're struggling right now with our son. Or, pray for me. I'm looking for work. That's truthful, but it's vague. Now, with somebody else, you might go into the emotion and the vulnerability, the fears that you have and the mistakes you've made. So I love that she said it's not without boundaries. We've got to be circumspect about that. One more myth that she talks about, and that is we can go it alone. Be a rugged individual. We need support. We need folks who will let us try on new ways of being without judging us. We need a hand to pull us up off the ground when we get kicked down in the arena. And if we live a courageous life, that will happen. So we're talking about this, and notice that the number starts to shrink here. Till we finally, what comes after vulnerability, it's transparency. If vulnerability is talking about what I need and letting that be known, then transparency is, here's who I am. Not only here's my dark side and my needy side, but you know what? Let me risk telling you about an invention I thought of in the shower the other day. It's going to change the world. Or, it's letting somebody hear your dreams as wild as they are. Letting them hear about the things you would love to do or the things you've always missed or regretted. And it's just letting someone be themselves and maybe pound the table for a while, say some things that are outlandish and even blasphemous, but you bring them back and you center them and help him balance again. This is what we call transparency. So I'm asking you today to do a personal inventory. Are there some man habits, some don'ts that need to be jettisoned from your friend culture? Are there some things that you've been paddling around in the shallow end long enough, and you're ready to get a little deeper, and you have an opportunity here to do that to some extent. You have an opportunity to do that by many other means. Or do you recognize that there's another man who could be a friend, but you need to be proactive? You need to move toward him. You need to take that risk to say, hey, let's have coffee. Or let's meet up let's go shoot together. Let's go on a road trip together. Can you come over and help me cut this tree down? What could possibly go wrong? So I have a brother challenge for you this week. How about this week you call a friend for no reason? How you doing? What's going on? I miss you. Or how about you'll ask a friend how he's really doing? You know all about the tests his wife is having. You know all about the job he's got. You know all about the kids and the struggles he's got. You know the details. You know the recipe. But how's it cooking in his life? Hey, I've heard all these things. I've heard these prayer requests, but how are you doing? Or here's another one. This week I'll tell a friend how I'm really doing. Hey, I just want you to know this. This job thing is a lot more threatening to me than I thought it was going to be. You know what? I'm out of options. I don't know what to do with with my daughter and her family. Would you just pray for me? I just wanted you to know that. You know, that's friend behavior. That is not manipulation. That's friend behavior. Well, I need a friend, don't you? And the heart wants to be friended. And that's a longing that God gave us. And he's given us a living church and a brotherhood of fellowship in which to find that. And maybe you'll find a bit of that this morning as you share around your table. So take the questions and get as far as you can today around your tables. Let's share together.